So this is what we're making. A gallery wire bezel for a half drilled flat back pearl. So I have a 12 millimeter flat back half drilled pearl that I'm going to set in gallery wire. So I've cut a 13 millimeter disc because my gallery wire is 0.5. Yep. So if I make my gallery wire to fit my 12 millimeter pearl, it will exactly sit on a 13 millimeter disc, and that way we won't have to do any cleanup around the edges. So gallery wire comes in all different sizes, and you just have to make sure that it's high enough to go over your, basically a cabochon. 5.4 high, which looks good. So now we just treat this like a regular bezel. It is sterling, but it's annealed, so it's easily bent. So the diameter of our pearl is actually 12. So that's good. So 12.5, because this is 0.5, times 3.14, 39.25. And I'm just going to measure it and put a texture mark on it. And that just shows me where to cut. Now I'm going to use my sharp straight blade shears and cut it just slightly long because I need to file it to ensure that it's perfectly flat. And I'll just hold it in my fingers and use my Swiss No. 2 cut flat hand file. Lovely. Almost perfect. Which is slightly long, and because it's slightly long, it would be too big. So we would rather that it was slightly small. Slightly small or perfect. And we'll settle for perfect. So now we'll just take our flat half round pliers and we'll just bend that into a long oval. Don't grab the very end of your metal, leave it stick out of your pliers a bit so you don't damage it. Take your time, make this as perfect as you can. And I'm happy with that. So now I'm just going to hold this in my third hand, joint up. We'll mix up our flex and put just a small amount on the join, inside and out. Now we're going to use a small piece of hard solder. And we'll place it on the outside of our join. You have to be fairly careful with this, because if your flame is in the wrong spot, you'll melt your claws. So we're going to dry out our flux. Make sure the solder's in the right spot. And I'm quite happy with that. So now we'll quench this in water and pickle it. So I've just slipped the bezel onto my bezel mandrel. Bezel mandrel is the same as a ring mandrel, it's just smaller. Make sure it's nice and round. And we'll check for fit by pushing it over our pearl. So that looks lovely. Now I've put my 13mm disc on a piece of screen because I want to heat this from underneath. So I'll just flex the disc, and I have hard solder that I've flattened in a rolling mill, and I'm just going to put three pieces that I'll move into place with my flex brush. And then I'll flex the bottom of my bezel. And we'll just push it into position because we want it as perfect as we can get it. I'm happy with that. Now we'll just slowly dry it out. We don't want the flux to bubble too much or it'll displace our bezel. So I'm happy with that. The flux is dry. I need to shift this little piece of solder over a bit. And now I'm just circling. Flux has gone clear. And the solder flowed, and I could see it flow all the way around my bezel, so I'm quite happy with that. So now we'll quench and pickle this, then we'll make a ring shank. Now the ring shank I'm using is 2.5 millimeters wide, 1.3 high, and my ring is 17 millimeters inside diameter. So we add 1.3, 18.3 times 3.14, 57.46, 57.5, and we can just roughly cut that using our side cutters because we're going to make a U-shaped ring shank, and it'll be about 12 millimeters shorter than it would be if we made a full circle. So I'm just going to anneal this now, bend my ring shank around my ring mandrel until I have the proper size. Then I'll cut the ends off, file them, and we'll solder them onto our bezel setting. Lovely. Now we can just take a straight edge because our setting has a flat base. This will be like the flat base, and we can just do it this way. So now we'll just clamp it in our old wooden ring clamp on the flat end with our marks just slightly proud. So we'll saw that and then file it back to the mark. Using our Swiss number 2 cut flat hand file. Lovely. Now we check that we filed it nice and flat, because if we did, it'll hold itself up. So I'm going to hallmark this at this point because these side shanks are fairly straight and it won't deform it. So I'm just holding my ring shank in my third hand. We'll put just a little bit of pressure on it. We look at it 2 or 3 different ways to make sure it's straight up and down and in the middle. And then we'll flex it, put a piece of solder at each point where the ring shank touches. And we'll start by drying out our flux and then pushing our solder into place. We just circle. Flux has gone clear and the solder flowed. We switch to the other side and the solder flowed, and I'm quite happy with that. So now we'll quench and pickle. Quench in water and pickle in sodium bisulfate. Alright, we're out of the pickle. I'm quite happy with it. And now it's time to go in the tumbler. So I make this shiny first and then we'll set the pearl. Alright, we're out of the tumbler. Everything's nice and shiny. And you can see it didn't bother the claws at all. So I'm not going to solder a pearl peg in because the pearl is slightly oblong. So when I hammer it in, because it's a snug fit, it'll actually make this oblong and then the pearl won't turn. So I'll just put this in our bench vise. And I'm going to rough up the inside a little bit because I am going to glue. And I'll just take a little round burr, put it in the handpiece, so just a few little marks on it, and I'm using 5-minute araldite, so just a spot of each because we don't want it to come up on the side of the pearl. So an equal amount, well mixed. So a little spot in the middle and a little spot right on the bottom of the pearl, and we just leave our toothpick in the glue. So now we'll just use our rawhide hammer tap it down, make sure it's level. It looks pretty good. And I'm just going to use a bezel rocker. I'll zoom in so you can see better. So we'll just push at a 45-degree angle. Go all the way around, and then go all the way around again. And now we'll take our burnisher and we'll just rub the top edge. Then go over it with your fingers, make sure there are no rough spots. Lovely. So I'm happy with that.